Hello and welcome to Blueprints for Modern Government Trust, brought to you by KPMG. I'm your host, George Jackson. An organization's supply chain is dynamic. It varies in size and complexity and is vulnerable to threats like natural disasters, accidents, malicious attacks. As a result, most organizations are beginning to reevaluate their supply chain security in order to better improve their posture and overall business operations. Today, you'll meet a group of leaders to hear more about the supply chain marketplace, best practices for managing attacks, closing security gaps, and improving delivery at both the state and federal levels. Let's kick things off with a panel of experts and hear how they've been effectively managing the security risks, data exchanges, IT infrastructure, and operations tied to their local supply chains. Eric Avakian is Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Pennsylvania. Susan Kellogg is the Chief Deputy State CIO for the state of North Carolina. And Kathy Cruz is Director of Cyber Government at KPMG. Thanks all for being here. Eric, let's start with you. How does your organization approach supply chain management? What type of mission objectives are you trying to address?
So first of all, thanks for having me here. This is a great discussion, particularly on supply chain, particularly what we've seen in recent events. This seems to be, continues to be an emerging area and a real challenge for big corporations, small state governments, local governments alike. And so this whole area in regards to supply chain management is really important. I think it boils down to a few key concepts, and that's really looking at an organization from a risk management perspective, and really trying to understand. So, for instance, while there's no way to completely secure an IT system, we can understand risk and really bring that down by understanding the security posture, not only of our own organization, but all the vendors and partners that make up our organization's supply chain. And then even equally as important as the collaboration aspects. So sharing intelligence and collaborating and partnering with both internal and external suppliers, and really trying to understand what makes up our partner supplier systems. So when we think about things like vulnerabilities and software vulnerabilities, what makes those systems operate, and then sharing that threat information with our partners, through our partner providers, through the federal government, and through our Department of Homeland Security, through our local government partners, and really freely sharing information so that people have the actionable intelligence to make informed decisions.
So Susan, what about in North Carolina? What type of mission objectives are you trying to solve?
Thank you for having me today in this great panel. This is a super discussion and very timely. One thing that we've seen an awful lot of in the last year and a half is threats down to the local level. And so I think for us, one of the major missions that we're trying to accomplish is making sure that the same kind of safeguards that we have in place at the state level, that we've extended down to the local level, and that we're protecting all of North Carolina and all of North Carolina's citizens. So that's a major challenge for us. It's a large, diverse, agile, active state, and so trying to keep that a safe state and in the cyber world has been a significant challenge, but one we're ready for.
So Kathy, I'm hearing some common themes here: emerging technology, information, collaboration, state and local level. Does that transport well with what you're hearing from clients all across the country?
It does, and I would also echo thank you for having me today. This is a very timely discussion. So our clients in the state and local government in particular are really wrestling with this supply chain issue. The environments have become so complex. They're hybrid. There's multiple clouds, there's on-prem, and now trying to elevate looking at third-party risk and supply chain risk, not abandoning, obviously, the traditional ways that systems are protected, applying security controls, but also elevating now that conversation at the executive and at the governance level around that third-party risk and around supply chain. The supply chain is very complex. Most organizations have system integrators, they're buying hardware, they've got service providers, those that are providing professional services, all of those within the supply chain can impact the risk to the environment. And it's not so much the ability to eliminate that, but to know the risk and mitigate it where possible and understand what the risk is and try to lessen it as much as possible.
So Eric, you're one of the longest serving CISOs at the state and local government level across the country. You've seen this field evolve over time. Information sharing, as you mentioned, critically important. How have you seen that evolve? What do you need more from for private sector partners regarding your IT supply chain?
So I think, if we look at it's a great question, because obviously this has been an evolution over the years. But one of the primary challenges, and I think, there's this theme when it comes to particularly state government. When citizens think of state government, they think of all government. They don't think of it as the breakdown between the state, the locals, and the counties, and the municipalities. They look at government services as government services. So I think what we've seen over the years is a shift, and we're doing the same in Pennsylvania, to look at it where we're partnering across our local government areas. So the counties, we've developed really good relationships with collaborating with our counties, also bringing in shared services to the county levels, because again, resources are scarce. When we start getting into those local county areas and the local government sectors, you start to see scarcity in resources. So partnering and providing, working together across these boundaries and building relationships so that people can learn from each other and we can share knowledge and share information. So getting that information back and forth to our local partners and governments is really important. And then, really then bringing those capabilities. So if there's something we're doing at the state level and we can expand that to the local government level, whether that be threat information sharing, cybersecurity services, so that those levels of capabilities are brought to the local government so that they're now able to partner and take advantage of some of the services at the state level. So we're doing that in Pennsylvania, and I think we start to see that now happening in many of the states because, again, the resources have not gone up at the local government levels. We have seen a lot of these types of attacks, particularly at the local government levels. So by doing more partnering, collaborating, sharing threat information, working again with our partners, then bringing those capabilities to our local government partners, we can then all succeed when it comes to this really challenging concept, so that when people have the actionable intelligence to make the decisions that they need to make, and then again, if somebody has an incident or they have a question, then those relationships have been built and people can pick up the phone, they know who to call. So it really comes down to really looking outside your comfort zone, building relationships across jurisdictional boundaries so that we can all improve. Because at the end of the day, we're all connected from a cybersecurity perspective. So we all need to work better together. And that's one of the biggest things and shifts that I've seen in my tenure as a CISO. We start to now have seen this collaboration across jurisdictional boundaries, and now also through the private sector, because it's really important to work with our partners, to work with our suppliers who are in the private sector community, to share that threat intelligence and information so that we're all working together and safeguarding equally.
So Susan, your perspective is somewhat unique on this group. You've spent significant time in the private sector, Fortune 500 companies before joining the administration. What do you take away from what Eric's saying there around communication, limited resources, using the private sector to kind of help solve those types of difficult supply chain challenges?
Right. He's spot on. So Eric, bravo. I think you stated it really well. It is building those relationships and not to get too squishy, but building trust. And so as we have gone through a tremendous amount in the last year and a half, part of what we've been doing is saying we're that trusted partner, just as we want the corporations that we work with to be trusted partners with us at the state level. We want the local government to view us in the same way, and we're here to help. And so that really facilitates that information sharing. And we have a lot more resources that we can bring to bear to protect the entire state and the citizens. And one thing we haven't really talked about is the privacy aspect of that. And so as we do more at the state to protect privacy, we're going to rely on these relationships more and more. There's education, all of us, this is an evolving situation. So making sure that we're staying up in the latest technology, we rely on our private companies to provide that information for us. For us at the state, I think one of the things that is I'll say unique, but we have to balance sharing of information with making sure we're not creating a competitive edge for a company. So when we do have work that we want to bid out, we've got to make sure that we've created a level playing field. So we do that information sharing, and we do it very carefully to make sure that we're staying true to what the state wants us to do, but also to get that best information, and then so that we can share it out. But at the cornerstone of all of it is a trust, particularly with the type of things that we're talking about. People don't want to raise their hand and say, hey, I think we've got a problem. Can you help? And what we want them to understand is when that hand is raised, we're there. There's no judgment. There's no questions. It's what can we do to help? How do we get you to a better state?
So Kathy, I saw you nodding your head enthusiastically during that response. What stood out there for you? She raised a lot of interesting points around privacy, around trust, and that communication between public and private sectors.
Well, what resonated is a couple of things. One, what Eric was talking about is not going it alone. I think from an IT perspective, we've seen clients that have very unique needs. And so when it comes to their applications, they may be, siloed or very specific. But when it comes to cybersecurity, all of our state clients and local municipalities are finding they can't go it alone. It's expensive, resources are scarce. The threat is usually not very singular, it's broad. And so, kind of banding together in a collaborative way, sharing resources, sharing information, sharing intel threats, all of that has become the preferred method for securing the systems that citizens rely on. And citizens don't, you're right, Eric, they don't look at it as, oh, this is a state service or a local service. It is a government service. And to Susan's point, what is the most important is that the citizen trusts the system, that they trust that their information, the privacy of their information is being protected. They don't know or maybe even care about third-party risk and supply chain risk, all of the things that we worry about every day, that we work on securing every day. At the end of the day, can the citizen trust that system to both perform well, but also to protect their information in a way that's appropriate for it? We see more and more states not only trying to work collaboratively across state lines, but within that state in ways that didn't happen before. It's a new frontier in terms of collaborating, sharing, working together, not competing with, we're going to compete with this other state, not really competing anymore. We see our clients really banding together to do the most effective job they can for the citizens that they serve.
So Kathy uses the phrase new frontier. I love that. Eric, earlier you mentioned, scarce resources and state and local governments needing to secure their supply chains with those limited resources. We'll talk to the Department of Veterans Affairs a little bit later. I know that they're employing emerging technology to help shore up those defenses. Are you employing emerging tech in Pennsylvania? And I'm thinking machine learning, artificial intelligence, anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, this is a great, and thanks for the question. This is such a great area because this is such a great time with technology. Things are moving so fast. Data, continues to expand, storage, people storing vast amounts of data. And yet when we look at resources are still constrained, right? So we've got a lot of information. Everybody's sending things electronically. And so communications are all electronic. So we see this disconnect when it comes to the vast amounts of data, communication channels, and on these vulnerabilities and threats that seem to be coming out, but yet resources are still not going up at the same rate. So with that being said, these great advances in technology, when we look at things like artificial intelligence and machine learning and automation, is absolutely a must. And so when we look at cybersecurity, the opportunity really is for organizations to really start getting into things like security orchestration, and really orchestrating and automating different types of events. So as we log traffic and log different types of events, we can take actions based on that. And as we correlate those different events, we can take actions to automated actions to actually address it. So that could be a firewall change, that could be blocking something, but it's an absolute must. And that really crosses into things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, because we can use all those different types of technologies. It's a new area, but what's the good part about this is a lot of the partners and suppliers now in this space are now embedding these types of things in their products. So as we look at new product rollouts coming out, they embed things like security orchestration in those tools, which is a really great advancement, because again, the resource challenge is still there, particularly again as we get into the local levels. And by utilizing security orchestration and automation, we can take advantage of the technology, where now the human can go back and do the analysis. They don't have to actually be putting in changes or pressing buttons. We can let the technology do that, and they can focus on the analysis and the more human aspects of what's needed.
So, Susan, what Eric is not saying there, and it's probably because he's modest, is that he's one of the pioneers in ICAM, identity credentialing and access management at the state and local level. What about in North Carolina? What sort of security methods are you employing there to shore up your defenses?
Well, I think what we're trying to do is work smarter, not harder necessarily. We just don't have just continuing growth, security resources to do things as manually as we've done. So this automation, the SOAR technologies are huge. We have a tremendous amount of capability available to us, so it's leveraging that and integrating it. I think really the fundamental shift is moving away from that triaging to a predictive, from the reactive to a predictive model, and trying to get in front of some of these threats as opposed to always being on the reactive side of it. And we do assessments, security assessments throughout the state on a regular basis. Those are tremendous, and we have some great National Guard resources available to us to assist with that, to give us that view of where are the things that we need to really focus on. Eric also touched on, and you talked about identity management. That's another area, again, not just the state employees' identity, but also the citizen identities. And so modernizing our tools there to build in, as Eric was saying, many companies are building in these capabilities. So staying with the more modern tools allows us to take advantage of some of these capabilities somewhat automatically.
So we've talked about process, we've talked about technology. I don't want to give short shrift to people. Let's spend the rest of our conversation there. Kathy, if I could start with you here, as you look across the spectrum, what are some of the most common needs around people for supply chain operations, making them more secure?
Well, all state governments have the same problem, which is there never are enough people to solve the problems that you have. It's a budget process, it's state finances, there's lots of different factors. And so one is people, and the second is train people, especially in the area of cybersecurity. It's very difficult for any organization to keep their staffs trained, up to date accordingly to what is needed. So to Eric and to Susan's point, the only hope there and the only help there is using automation and machine learning. But there also needs to be that human factor involved, because when you do employ AI, ML, you still at the end of the day need people to work on the most complex problems and be in front and leading and driving. Recruiting is very difficult. All of our clients find that recruiting qualified cybersecurity staff continues to be a challenge. There is a deficit between, the pool of available candidates versus the needs, regardless of budget. There's still, even if you have a budget, it's very difficult to find people and to retain people. That becomes one of the biggest challenges. And frankly, most individuals would prefer to work on things that are more modern, the technologies that are more modern, in order to both be effective and develop their career. So it continues, and it will continue to be a challenge.
Susan, what about you? What are some of the top people needs that you have in the state of North Carolina around supply chain?
So a security expert, and the thing is that it's no longer this group of people or the security experts. Everyone has to. Security is going to be part of everyone's job, part of everyone's job, and understanding this evolving frontier, if you will, is particularly, and as we move to cloud, and it's something that we haven't really talked about, that's a whole nother level that we have to take a look at. But when we look at people, one of the things that we've been doing a tremendous job of is building cyber internship programs. And so bringing folks in, we have a veterans program, bringing in veterans, training them specifically in cyber on-the-job training, working with some of our state and local government folks so that they're, it's not book learning, it's on the job, here's what's happening. And that's been a tremendous success. So I think building that pipeline of people, building a education program throughout our organization and throughout the state to keep people mindful, because we know the threats start with the individual. And so that's extremely important as well. Cyber is a different way to think. And so it's thinking about things differently as we move to the cloud, move to more of a broker model. That's also, and how are we verifying and making sure that we've taken the, and we haven't bypassed. Some things may be easier, but they also may not have the protections that we need to have in place. So those are things that are important. The last thing, something as simple as tabletop exercises where we're taking a look at, here's what the scenario is, how would we respond, how should we respond, and working through that with our executive staff as well as our staff who are in the trenches, doing the day-to-day work, because we rely on all of our people to recognize when something is not as it should be, and then what do they do, because speed is important. So being able to respond quickly to a situation so that we can reduce and mitigate the risk.
So Eric, I'd like to close with you, and I want to put that point that Susan raised about the cloud to you to bring this program to a close. Where does the cloud play in this discussion around supply chain management?
Yeah, I think it's great. And Kathy and Susan hit on such great points, particularly when it comes to all the different areas of cybersecurity and cloud notwithstanding. I mean, when we look at cloud, more and more organizations are moving to the cloud, including state and local governments. And so, we talk about the human element, and it's really, what makes a person tick. I mean, there's some folks on our staff who really understand the cloud. We have a cloud use process in place. So as agencies want to put their applications or consider putting applications in the cloud, having a good process and a review process, which is comprised of a team of personnel to determine, and kind of ask the right questions. So what's great about the human element with cloud is that, finding the right talent to fit those types of, fit those types of areas. So for instance, our cloud review group is comprised of a lot of talented folks on the team who are really passionate about the cloud, and they really understand it, and they're asking the right questions, and they can understand those risks. So it comes down to risk management overall when it comes to cloud. And it's really knowing what are the right questions when it comes to data, when it comes to the threats and the risks on that data. What is the cloud platform? Is the application that's in the cloud platform validated? Has the source code been reviewed? So it's really taking a look at it from a lot of different aspects. And then you've got the contract aspect of it. So when we talk about people and personnel, there's a whole other array of people who like to write and they understand contracts. And it's putting those types of people in the right areas to ask the right questions from a contractual standpoint so that we can ensure the right terms and conditions are in those contracts. And then Susan hit a great point when it comes to cybersecurity exercises, and really then bringing these people together, doing exercises when it comes to things like supply chain, whether that be a cloud incident, and bringing people together regarding that, and how would we all work together. And again, that also builds relationships between different members of the team, including the contract team and the actual cybersecurity analyst team. And then we can then, through those exercises, learn how to improve. Do we need to actually improve our contracts? What would we change? What would we do differently? Do we need to change our cloud review process? So I think, cloud is just one piece of it, but, we can bring all of these different areas. And it really, at the end of the day, it's about how do we mitigate and understand our risk to the organization so that at the end of the day, we can make the business succeed. Cybersecurity is about the business, and it's really about ensuring that the business can succeed and we can reduce risk as much as we can so that they can succeed.
Eric Avakian, Susan Kellogg, Kathy Cruz, thanks so much. I know our audience got a lot out of this today. I appreciate your time. We know you're busy.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's important for organizations to be able to adapt quickly so they can properly identify, protect, and maintain resilient supply chain operations. After our quick break, we'll continue the conversation around supply chain security with experts at the federal level. You're watching Blueprints for Modern Government Trust on GovExec TV. I'll be right back.
Our world is changing fast. Government increasingly finds itself bearing a heavy burden from heightening public demand for services, solutions, leadership. We can anticipate the change ahead to build a government that is connected, offering employees meaningful work in a flexible environment, enabling resilient communities and providing citizens with positive experiences. Trusted, placing the highest priority on security and privacy, understanding the importance of safeguarding data from theft and unauthorized use. Powered, hiring professionals who can use technology and innovation to transform public services. Power governments enable resiliency, scalability, and responsiveness to achieve agency mission. We call this modern government, and we'd like to tell you more about it.
Welcome back to Blueprints for Modern Government Trust on GovExec TV. I'm George Jackson. Organizations almost everywhere are transforming to become more digital businesses. To get the most value from their working capital, they need to manage the security risks that accompany their supply chains, from IT infrastructure to operational components. Let's learn more about the benefits of transparency and get some insight into what it means to be prepared in 2021. Chad Jones is Managing Director of Federal Supply Chain and Operations at KPMG. LaWanda Jones is Deputy Chief Information Officer in the Office of Strategic Sourcing at the Department of Veterans Affairs. LaWanda, thanks for being here. Chad, you too. LaWanda, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about mission. This is an unprecedented time. You've been doing a ton of work on supply chain. Give us a sense of kind of what you've been working on.
Yeah, we've been really working on our ICTS supply chain risk management strategy. And it's really, we're looking at this as a holistic effort. Many of you may know that the OIG reports, the GAO audit reports for all the federal government agencies, and none of us have really fared well on these audits. But if one thing the COVID-19 pandemic did for us in the government was to really open our eyes to the supply chain and the risks as we've seen never before, because in essence, it is really it's a global effort, and supply chain risk management, we're looking at it from a holistic perspective. VA is a very diverse, geographically distributed organization, and so we have developed an ICTS supply chain risk strategy that looks at it holistically, not just from just a pure IT perspective, but also from personal equipment, medical devices. And those medical devices, they have IT embedded in them. So we are heads down and have been working this strategy from a VA enterprise-wide perspective.
So Chad, she raises an interesting point. I'm going to use LaWanda's wording, opened our eyes to the risk. Over the past year or two, do you feel like that's common with the federal civilian, the Department of Defense, the intelligence community agencies that you work with? Are their eyes being opened?
Absolutely, absolutely. And as LaWanda said, the enterprise approach to this process has been just absolutely critical. When you think of, as she talked about, the customers of the VA, but you also think about the warfighter from a defense perspective and in the civilian and health agencies, there's nothing more important than getting your client or your customer what they need, when they need it, and where they need it at. So that risk perspective of not having a mission-capable, ready equipment has been just dire for the organizations. So when we think about it, I'll take a few words from our cue from LaWanda's point of view. The holistic approach, looking at it from an integrated strategy of being able to go from acquisition all the way through logistics, transportation, asset management, even fulfillment and reverse logistics, bringing gear back from the user back in for repair operations has been hypercritical for the organization. And it's typically revolved around a set of metrics. And it's, what is the speed of that process? How quick can I get this to the warfighter? Secondly, it's all around, as LaWanda said, the mission capable rate or the mission readiness. And we typically measure that in a percentage. And we want to be in that high 80%, 90% range of being ready for when it's needed. Even in a civilian type of operation where we saw in the COVID type of instances, the National Guard or the DoD being ready to support the cities of Chicago and the West Coast and East Coast side of this with the Comfort and Mercy, the two ships in New York and on the West Coast side. Then I think finally it's the overall criticality or reducing complexity in that mission. So it's been hypercritical from that aspect of making sure that satisfying that need, the criticality of getting it where you need it, when I need it, and in what I actually need.
So LaWanda, Chad raises an interesting point here. People may not necessarily understand how federated the Department of Veterans Affairs is. You have a lot of organizations that you need to combine efforts for successful supply chain management. Talk a little bit about data, the role that your office plays with the CIO in breaking down those silos that Chad's talking about.
Yeah, thank you so much. So in the Office of Information and Technology, as many folks may know, VA has an IT appropriated fund. But from a CIO perspective, the CIO is responsible for all IT capabilities regardless of the funding source. So when you look at the VA and you look at the fact that we are the largest healthcare industry in the United States, if not in the world, and then on top of that, we have a national cemetery effort, and we also have the Veterans Benefits or Administration, which if you look at that, that's a financial organization. So if you look at VA from a holistic perspective, there's a medical aspect, there's a financial aspect, as well as there's a cemeteries. You can look at that from a real estate aspect. All of that requires IT capabilities that has to be secure. And in doing so, we've got to be in a position where we can identify the high value assets and the critical data needed for those high value assets so that we can put a risk-based decision matrix around that in order to make supply chain risk-based decisions, in order to ensure that we're looking at this from a cybersecurity perspective, a procurement perspective, a sourcing perspective. So all of the stars have got to be aligned. But let me just say, we can't do everything. So one of the things that we're doing initially is outlining those high value assets, outlining those critical software assets, And as you know, the president's latest executive order on supply chain risk management, it's huge. It encompasses just about everything that we do. And so we've got to work holistically as an enterprise that is geographically dispersed, that we're all over the world. We're all over the U.S. And so having a supply chain effort is critical, and communicating with our partners is especially critical.
So, Chad, what Lawanda's talking about there, I think in a word comes down to visibility. Exactly. You know, how do organizations like KPMG help, you know, huge organizations like the Department of Veterans Affairs eliminate those blind spots in their supply chain?
As Lawanda stated, we start with the idea of that integration point of view, all the way back to the acquisition process, where we start to integrate with the OEM vendors and suppliers in this process. Just as Lawanda stated, it's absolutely critical to understand how and when and where their supply chain is working, when these type of deliveries are going to take place. And it also changes in this, especially when you have more routine and critical type deliveries, as you said, those high value assets. And we start thinking about the transportation and logistics network, especially when you get to organizations like Postal Service and others, when you think about some of the largest, logistics companies in the world, understanding where your equipment is, where your mail is, where any type of component in that process is at that point in time is all about the data. And I think Lawanda nailed it when she really said the data is a key part of this, because what we like to do is think of it from an orchestration point of view. How do we continue to look forward in this process, less through the rearview mirror and forward through this process, to understand how we can start to tune and adjust and predict where these processes are going to go and where they're going to take place. So for example, as we start to think about the need of certain activities, is there a seasonality? Is there a geographical aspect to them? Is there more of a social media marketing type of aspect to this process that we need to consider in predicting when certain aspects are going to take place definitely as part of the supply chain? So data plays a critical role in this, and being able to use that type of information to go through that process is, especially as Lawanda said, is critical to her operation and being able to forecast when those activities are going to take place. And I think finally, it's the idea of understanding and informing our leadership around when and where and how they can start to make critical decisions, especially around high value assets, as Lawanda stated. When we think about anything from an inventory point of view or parts point of view, we typically look at it from what moves quick to what moves slower, what is more value to less value, the criticality around it, the provenance, as she said, and understanding the risk behind that. And this all starts with the data and information.
So, Lawanda, that inventory at the VA is phenomenal. You have a ton. I mean, arguably, you have the largest IT budget in all of government. It's enormous. That's a lot to wrap your arms around. I mean, as far as visibility and what Chad's talking about here, where does emerging tech plug in? Are you guys looking to employ machine learning, artificial intelligence, others to make that process easier for VA?
That's a good question. And first and foremost, we've got to look internally within our business processes and procedures that we have. And then we have been collaborating with a lot of vendor partners and other agencies to say, what are you doing? How are you doing it? What are some of those best practices that we need to implement first? And sure, when you're looking at AI and bots, and when you look at what we're doing with telehealth, emerging technology will play a huge role. But I think the first and foremost priority for us, one of the biggest mistakes that the federal government always makes is running out to technology. Let's buy the latest and greatest. Let's understand our business processes, and let's understand what are those things that we need to do from a cybersecurity perspective, from a supply chain perspective, because we can't swallow the whole elephant. And guess what? We cannot afford to say everything is a high value assets, because we only have a finite amount of funding. And so if everything becomes a high value asset, nothing is a high value asset. So we have been reaching out to industry to really come and talk to us about, share your experiences with us. What are some of the best practices that are that we need to look at internally within the department before we just go and say, we're going to get this technology, that technology. And so, yeah, understanding what the landscape is from a technology perspective is great. And we must incorporate the best processes and procedures so that when that technology comes along, we don't have to worry about business processes getting in the way. This is the all hands on deck, particularly when you're looking at an organization as complex and diverse as the department is.
Well, Chad, play armchair quarterback here for me a little bit. You know, LaWanda seems to me to have her priorities right in order, this focus on business processes and not diving in, you know, with both feet on emerging technology until she feels like the organization is ready. Is that where you would suggest agencies start?
I think a couple of things come out of that. Number one, I think she's absolutely correct. We can't speed up bad processes. We're just going to get bad results out of those. We're going to get more defects quicker. So having your processes in a way that's somewhat immune to inefficiencies and effectiveness is critical. But I think secondly, what we've, as she said about the federal government, and even any of our client partners or our customers, is understanding the technology readiness of where they're at in this process. So we know in some cases, you mentioned inventory a while ago in the VA, we know that most of the warehouses and inventory processes and asset management processes are still done with clipboard and pen and paper. And it's the old-fashioned method. So just instituting some basic technology of barcoding equipment, handheld readers, voice-to-tech headsets, things of that sort that can just, what we call connect or enable the material handler and supply tech in this process is a step in the right direction. And maybe, you know, it's a small step, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. From there, starting to connect the systems. And I'm not saying, or I don't think we're advertising at all to start, you know, sunsetting major ERP and SAP systems. But as she mentioned bots a few minutes ago, you can start connecting systems with RPA or robotic process automation bots to where you can move data back and forth and free up those acquisition specialists to do less with the more menial tasks and more with kind of the more thought-provoking tasks. And I think finally it's the emergence of these low-code platforms and so forth that connect the systems together, that draw information out, and you can do stuff in these low-code platforms and drive it back into the supply chain systems. It just makes the usability, the flexibility of the process more enabling to the acquisition specialist, the logistician, whoever it may be in the process itself. So I think in summary, yes, processes have to be corrected. We just don't want to speed those up in a bad way. But also the idea of adding certain enabling technologies, I think in the forefront is critical. Move past the point of manual activity.
Yeah. Hey, LaWanda, talk a little bit about people as we come to the close of this segment here. What are your biggest people needs? What do you need to address regarding personnel, and where do you need help?
Yeah, you know, on the personnel side of the house, I think the whole federal government has a problem with, keeping up with from a cybersecurity personnel perspective. But I also believe that one of the things that we have not really done a good job on is supply chain strategists. And so we need to be training our staffs. We're not going to grow people overnight, but what we can do is to train our current staff in the processes and procedures that we need from a supply chain risk management perspective. And I also think that we need to start looking at the knowledge, skills, and abilities so that we can retool our staffs appropriately. And I also believe personally, as I stated before we started, this effort is personal to me because I too am retooling myself in this particular field, as I pursue my doctorate degree. And I want to really look at do my dissertation on supply chain risk management because I believe it is personal and it is professional. And so this is one of the strengths that we need to build up within the federal government. supply chain strategists. We've all got, I was a logistician when I was in the Army, one hat in the Army. But I believe that where we are today, we have focused on procurement, we're focused on cybersecurity, workforce, but have we really focused on what it means to be a supply chain strategist in the government, particularly looking at it from an IT perspective?
Well, two no better supply chain strategists than those here with me today. Chad Jones in studio, LaWanda Jones via remote. Thank you so much, both you, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, the audience, for tuning in. I hope you learned a little bit about how to identify risks in your own supply chain and how to react when you find them. Join me back here on September 27th for the next installment of Blueprints for Modern Government Experience. For GovExec, I'm George Jackson.